The year is 1852. You are 22 years old, the daughter of a wealthy man from a good family. You've married well. It's spring, and you've come to visit your family on Edisto Island in South Carolina. But during your stay, you fall ill. You develop a sore throat, and soon your coughing becomes constant. You develop a rash and a fever. You can't leave your bed. Your mother tries to soothe your anguish with cool cloths and comforting words. But days pass, and your weakness grows until it happens. You stop breathing. You've passed away, surrounded by your family, who could have never anticipated that this visit would be your last. Your burial will be the next day, as there's no embalming in the 1800s in rural South Carolina. And a carriage carries your coffin down live oak-lined roads. Spanish moths hangs down and cast shadows over what should be a bright spring day. Your coffin is delivered to your tomb, and after some tear-filled prayers, you are laid to rest. The door is sealed, and your family departs. But later, you awaken in the darkness and find yourself alone in your crypt. Your screams are useless, your mind racing as you realize no one will be coming to save you. Welcome, travelers. You've landed alongside the wandering soul, and today we're delving into the subject of being buried alive. So sit back and listen to some remarkable tales, some legendary, some verified, of those who've been given a unique and terrifying glimpse of life after death. If you visit Julia Legree's tomb on Edisto Island, you'll find a quaint southern churchyard that dates back to the 1770s. The white church is picturesque, as are the graves themselves, many of them ornate, some surrounded by dark wrought iron fences. Julia's tomb is set further back in the graveyard. It's small, constructed of a sandy-colored stone, with her husband's name etched above where the door should be. Historically, it's known that Julia was entombed in 1852. The crypt, which holds the remains of Julia, her husband, and her young son, still exists, and indeed, there is no door on the small stone structure. No historical records exist, however, of any fateful error that led to her being mistakenly sealed in the tomb. But her legend is well known, and the tomb itself is filled with scattered coins and flowers from those who've come to pay their respects, even if it is only respect paid to a horrifying legend. The fear of being buried alive is called tapophobia. Back in the 1800s, some people installed chains in coffins attached to bells to alert those above ground of a possible accidental premature burial. There were actual patents placed for devices that would help those poor souls subjected to premature burial. So there must have been some fear of it occurring. But did it really happen? And did anyone really survive an accidental burial? We don't really have a number for how many people were actually buried alive, but there are some cases where victims were found, either still alive or frozen in the throes of death. In 1884, a young woman named Anna Hawkwalt passed away at her brother's wedding on January 10th. Where what was to be a joyous celebration had suddenly turned into a somber, devastating event. Her death was put down to sympathetic palpitation of the heart. When several friends protested that she had looked too lifelike to have actually been a corpse, she was exhumed. Unfortunately, she looked like a real-life Julia Legree. According to newspaper accounts, her fingers were gnawed down to the bone, and her body had been displaced, evidence that she had been moving inside her coffin. She was found lying on her right side, and portions of her hair had been torn out. We can only imagine the terror she must have felt, coming to consciousness inside that small, dark coffin, screaming out, growing more and more desperate as she realized no one would save her. She was alone with the realization that her life truly would end in that confined, horrible space. In 1937, a young Frenchman would survive a horrific accident that surprisingly led to a long life of fame. Angelo Hayes was a 19-year-old motorcyclist, and on September 1st, he sped through the streets only to meet tragedy by crashing headlong into a brick wall. Hayes was buried fairly hastily. He had been declared dead at the scene, his body having undergone significant trauma. But the problem was, Angelo Hayes wasn't dead. His body had rather shut down due to the trauma. He may have slipped into a coma. In fact, due to his head injury. And it was only through remarkable circumstances that Hayes survived. It seems that Hayes' father had taken out a large life insurance policy only 2 weeks before his death, and the insurance company, suspecting that something was amiss, demanded that a full autopsy be performed. So, 2 days after his funeral, Angelo Hayes was exhumed, and to everyone's surprise, his body was still warm. Hayes went on to make a full recovery and to make the most of his astonishing brush with death. Whether he recognized a good opportunity or whether he feared what had almost become of him, Hayes invented a coffin that could sustain a human life should the unthinkable happen again. His coffin was outfitted with comforts like a means to play music, a small oven, and even toilet paper. Hayes took his coffin on tour and was met with success, as many wanted to meet the man who had cheated death. Hayes went on to live to the grand age of 90, not actually dying until 2008. In Basingstoke, England, lies the grave of Alice Blunden. She had been laid to rest in 1674, but poor Alice had the misfortune of being buried alive not once, but twice. The legend goes that Alice, the wife of a well-to-do malt merchant, had passed away after imbibing a large quantity of poppy water. Poppy water would be referred to as an opiate-based drink today, something like the laudanum enjoyed in the 19th century. Derived from opium, such a concoction would have a sedating quality, so it's no surprise that after Alice had consumed a large quantity of the drink, she lapsed into a death-like coma. Alice's husband was away on business at the time of her demise, but her family didn't want her burial delayed. The weather was warm, and with no refrigeration or embalming chemicals available in the 1600s, Alice was buried quite quickly. Apparently, she was also quite a large woman, and with the haste of her interment being of necessity, she was apparently forced into a somewhat too small coffin. The story goes that 2 days later, children playing in the churchyard heard noises coming from the newly created grave. They hurriedly reported what they had heard, but they were not believed. Not until a full day after did the schoolmaster take it upon himself to investigate the children's claims. He heard her cries, but it took some time until she could be disinterred. When the coffin was finally opened, she was found covered in bruises, covered in blood, and in such a weakened state that she passed out. And yes, it was assumed, again, that she was this time actually dead. Who could have survived such an ordeal? Alice Blunden was immediately reburied. It isn't recorded as to why it was decided to disinter Alice yet again the next morning. Maybe some lingering doubts remained. Perhaps her husband had returned and wanted to see his wife one last time. But when the coffin was opened yet again, her family discovered that she had reawoken within her grave. She had, in her panic, torn at her face so horribly that her mouth was completely ripped away, and she was laid to rest yet again, this time for good. In his story, The Premature Burial, Edgar Allan Poe wrote, "The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where one ends and where the other begins?" Poe's work is filled with tales of premature burial. Famously, in The Fall of the House of Usher, Madeline Usher is buried alive, perhaps purposefully, by her brother Roderick, and her reemergence from the tomb to exact revenge upon her brother is terrifying, to say the least. Her winding sheet is bloody, her fingers raw from clawing at the metal door of the tomb. Poe writes, "There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame." In The Cask of Amontillado, The Black Cat, The Premature Burial, Poe examines this theme. What would happen? What horrors would we undergo were we to be put living inside the tomb? Poe's fascination with death is one that haunts us all to one extent or another. We can't help but wonder what lies beyond the veil. In our modern society, the risk of being interred alive is exceedingly low, yet the idea still fascinates us. Perhaps this fear is related to psychological fears of being alone, of being abandoned, and being buried alive represents the ultimate abandonment scenario. Trapped in the dark with nothing but our own thoughts, we would be left to confront ourselves, our own inner darknesses and fears, with no chance at rescue. Maybe Poe uncovered for us in his stories the pinnacle of trauma. As Poe writes, "My fancy grew charnel. I talked of worms, of tombs, and epitaphs. I was lost in the reveries of death, and the idea of premature burial held continual possession of my brain. The ghastly danger to which I was subjected haunted me day and night. In the former, the torture of meditation was excessive, in the latter, supreme. When the grim darkness overspread the earth, then, with every horror of thought, I shook as the quivering plumes upon the hearse. When nature could endure wakefulness no longer, it was with a struggle that I consented to sleep, for I shuddered to reflect that, upon awakening, I might find myself the tenant of a grave. And when, finally, I sank into slumber, it was only to rush at once into a world of phantasms above which, with vast, sable, overshadowing wing, hovered predominant the one sepulchral idea." So, travelers, when you find yourself on a dusty two-lane road, moving beneath the live oaks, the Spanish moss diluting the bright spring sun, and when your carriage turns into the small churchyard surrounded by black wrought iron, and you are tenderly lowered from the carriage to the tomb, don't pause in your shallow breathing. Don't forget to awkwardly try to raise your hand to your face in that enclosed black space. Perhaps your screams will not be in vain. You may be one of the lucky ones to be saved, to be pulled back to shore at the last moment from the dark river we must all cross. The Wandering Soul is written and produced by Wandering Nix. Our music is generously provided by John Osborne Farley, and you can find his work on Spotify and follow him on Facebook. This podcast is recorded and edited at Genesee Valley Media under the direction of Nick Davis. Follow Wandering Nicks and The Wandering Soul on Facebook, and check back for more stories of the paranormal, the haunted, and the unusual. And wander with a friend so you don't get lost.
It's sunset. Reaching out a wing, telephone man. Gentle, still, and far above with a gown.